to Sovereign Conversations with the Soul Attorney, the podcast where law, leadership, and liberation collide. I'm your host, Vanessa Locicero, lawyer, entrepreneur, energy worker, and your guide to building a business and life that's truly sovereign. Here, we challenge the status quo, outdated business rules, and explore what it really means to be sovereign in your life and work. Whether we're breaking down legal essentials, tapping into spiritual downloads and the power of intention, or we're having deep, unfiltered conversations with visionary entrepreneurs, healers, and thought leaders, every episode is designed to help you step into your power, protect what matters, and create your life on your own terms. So if you're ready to create a life and business rooted in belief, power, and purpose, take a deep breath, step into your sovereignty, because court is now in session.
Oh, 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 oh.
Welcome back to Sovereign Conversations with the Soul Attorney, a place where courage meets clarity and legal becomes easy. Today, we're going to be talking about building a business the DIY way, and what you don't know can actually hurt you. So before you change the channel or, turn the podcast off because you don't want to listen to a boring legal episode, I'm here to tell you that DIY, that legal foundation that you've done all by yourself, it is full of cracks. And I want to make sure that you are leading your life and building your business from a foundation of sovereignty, of legal protection. It's all about foresight, my friends. So this episode is for you if you're someone who's selling offers without a contract, if you're running business as a sole proprietor, not really sure about the liability risks involved in that, or you're thinking, I'll just deal with legal later. This episode is for you. We're going to be talking about legal risk management and how taking action proactively is the most sovereign thing you can do in your business. Now, with that, my friends, as you know, court is now in session. So, as sad as this is, and is, a bitter pill to swallow as it might be, I want to start this off with a story because, stories can really touch us and really connect, because we can see ourselves in the stories. So when I started my legal career, I started on the other side of the legal spectrum. So right now I practice mainly as a solicitor, preparing documents, more transactional in nature, for my clients. But when I started my career, I was on the barrister side of things. So I was going to court. I was dealing with conflict. And the main conflicts that I was dealing with back then when I was getting started and doing litigation work were commercial and civil conflicts. So I heard all kinds of terrible stories about business decisions gone awry, people making all kinds of, steps, actions, commitments, legally binding things in business, and not knowing anything about what they're doing. Okay. So there's that side of things. And then on the other side of things, I spent a couple of years suing people for their negligence, suing businesses for my clients getting hurt at their place of business for, whatever different acts or omissions or different liabilities that they had that, they needed to take care of. So I saw all of it. I saw all different kinds of issues and conflicts and clients coming to me in tears, coming to me after losing tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars on business decisions, business deals that they entered into in good faith with a handshake with a friend because they thought we'll get the legal later. So specifically, I want to, and I'm not going to be sharing real names or any context. These are all stories that I have seen enough times that they are like caricatures. So there's no like specific client information in any of these stories that I'm going to share. But, let's call this client, Jane Smith. And this person was in the process of putting together a beautiful coaching program where she had 8 modules. It was, over the course of a couple months, it was a group program. And as she was launching, she brought in, maybe whatever number of clients she wanted on that initial launch. And it was awesome. I remember she was like, everything was gold. And then she did all this without a contract, obviously. That's the moral of this story. But one of the clients went through the whole program and then issued a credit card chargeback. And my client had no recourse. There was nothing in her anywhere to point to as it related to chargebacks. And, this member of her program claimed that she didn't receive any services, and there was nothing for her to point to, nothing for her to stand behind that, she went through all this showing proof and showing all of these things. But when, they asked for that signed agreement with terms and conditions, there was none. There was nothing for her to point to. So unfortunately, that whole chargeback disappeared. And, that was an expensive lesson for that individual because not only was there, the loss of money from the actual chargeback, but all the money incurred in dealing with the dispute. And this is what happens is like people enter into verbal agreements. Even like one client, it was like siblings, here's a loan for a couple $100,000 and we didn't get anything in writing. And somebody thought, they don't want to return the money. And now they're saying it's a gift instead of a loan. There are so many examples when you're dealing with clients, when you're dealing with small business things, especially because people think, well, my business is a small business. It doesn't really require investing or putting that money out into creating a solid legal foundation when I've got so many other bills to pay, right? When I need to pay my staff, buy inventory, deal with taxes, deal with all the things that we need to deal with, legal always ends up at the bottom of the list. And, all of these things, they're there for a reason. Unfortunately, like there are foundational legal things that help us to actually act from a position where we can provide those services to our customers and our clients from a place of knowing and in integrity with that relationship, knowing that there is that reciprocity there and the terms are anchored by something that's physical and manifested in writing. So I talk about that kind of risk just as an example, but I want to articulate a couple categories of legal risks that might be able to help you kind of slot, maybe some of the questions or experiences you might think for yourself in your own business. So the one I mentioned was like contractual risk, either having a bad contract or no contract at all. Contracts can be bad when I say that. Either the terms are so ambiguous that they're unclear, that a random objective third party looking at this document can look at it and have zero idea what actually is like being exchanged in the agreement. So that contractual risk, obviously, you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself against that by putting proper documents in place. Compliance risk is another thing. There are laws out there that set a standard for you to comply with that is strict adherence, and your liability is based on whether or not you adhere or not. So, a great example of something like that is privacy legislation in Canada. Whether you choose to, pretend that it applies to you or not, it applies to all organizations collecting personal information. So, you need to comply with, that privacy, for example. What about things related to consumer protection and anti-spam laws. Like those are just other examples. Compliance laws also relate to like keeping your corporation up to date every year with your annual returns and, other types of compliance that you have to deal with based on the circumstances that you're in. So not knowing, or I don't know, or, those kinds of things are unfortunately not an excuse when you're dealing with commercial things, because the law says, hey, you're a business owner. You're supposed to know this. The law treats businesses differently than it treats, general people out in the world who don't engage in commercial activity. But if you're engaging in commercial activity, the law is going to hold you to this standard of care as a reasonable person in your shoes in a lot of circumstances. And so you want to make sure that you know all of the things that you have to do to stay compliant with the laws in your area. So I mentioned like more, federal laws in that example of privacy law, but there's different types of laws. And especially in circumstances with small businesses, you want to make sure you're looking at all of the different levels of applicable law in your area, especially things like zoning, bylaws, and other types of municipal or provincial or, laws as well. Another huge risk, which is like really, this is a sad one. Intellectual property risk is something that I see small business owners missing the mark on over and over again, because you're out there operating thinking that your domain name or your business name registration with your provincial registrar is enough to protect your name out in the world of commerce. And unfortunately, that is not always the case. So in Canada, there are different types of intellectual property laws that apply to all of the intellectual property that you create in and for your business. And so you want to make sure that all of those things are clearly protected and articulated, whether it be through different registrations or notices under each of the different types of IP, legislative systems. But IP risk can also be managed contractually. As far as IP ownership goes, being explicitly clear on ownership and licensing of your rights surrounding your intellectual property is something that you want to be alive to. So other things that are important are things like operational risk. To me, this also falls into the category of like ensuring that you're meeting your standards of care from a negligence perspective related to your level of interacting with people out there in the world. So are you doing the things that a reasonable business owner in your shoes, should be doing in order to say that you are acting reasonably and you did everything you needed to do to make sure that all the situations were taken care of? Do you deal with, policies and procedures, standard operating things that your staff can, click off or check off as part of their daily processes and tasks, that if your organization was to be challenged legally, that you can point to and say, oh yeah, we did that check and we did that and we have proof that we did that on this day. And so you're doing things like that and you're setting those processes up in your business and actively following through on them and holding your, business to that account, so that if there's something that happens, you have documented proof that can support you legally. So from an operational standpoint, that can be something that can be very helpful. And finally, the last kind of like little piece of risk I want to talk about is structural risk, because when you are setting up your business, there are different ways that you can do that. We know you can be a sole proprietor, you can be a partner, you can do a joint venture relationship, you can have different types of contractual relationships, or if you are, in that position, you can incorporate in Canada. And there's different ways you can incorporate different kind of processes and structures to follow. But the important thing is that you know and understand the pros and cons and the differences between the different structures, so that when you set them up, you're saying, okay, I get it that when I'm a sole proprietor or I'm in a partnership, the law doesn't see a separate legal entity out there doing business. It sees me. I am my sole proprietorship. So if I get sued or my, sole proprietorship or my partnership gets sued, there is no separate company that's getting sued. That is you. That is your, all your assets on the line. That, if you don't have any insurance or you don't have appropriate insurance, there's a huge risk there to your assets. So those are the different types of risk that I think help to, create buckets and categories for you to understand. It's not just one thing as far as legal risk goes when we're talking about risk management, getting ahead of the horse, getting ahead of the risk and putting those things in place ahead of time. Another story that I want to, touch on, this one actually I saw multiple times um, in my, litigation practice and getting into my work as a solicitor, was disputes around branding and brand names and protecting your brand. And unfortunately, there were, several instances with various clients and different people out there where, they'd put years, all this money, all this effort, all this time into building a brand, building a website, building your business cards, building everything, all your marketing, all your everything, only to get hit with a cease and desist letter because they didn't even know that there was a trademark database that they had to search before they chose their brand name. They thought, oh, the domain was free. The name was available in my jurisdiction, so I'm good. When really, like, that cease and desist was from a company who registered the trademark prior, had gone through the process, and had the legal right to tell you to cease and desist. So really in those circumstances, it's really sad because clients are having to go through the process of rebranding, and like the costs on that, are limitless depending on, the scope of your branding in your business. So that is another horror story that you just really want to make sure you're setting yourself up for success. And, if you are serious about your business, if you want your business to be solid, to give you a feeling of security and something that is not going to be, open to attack, then there's a couple things that you really, really need to think about. Whether or not they apply to you and whether or not, it makes sense for you is definitely a convo you should have with a specific lawyer. And some of these things, like anything I'm talking about in any of these podcast episodes, are not legal advice, but, you really want to think about getting lawyer drafted agreements in place. So this isn't just like, here's a bullet point list. I've seen all kinds of agreements, whether they're service agreements, client agreements, contractor consulting agreements. Like, I could list all types of agreements out, but the point is they are not just, here's the deliverables and the timeline. There are a lot of important things that go into those service agreements that you want to include. Payment terms, cancellation policies, IP clauses, dispute resolution, timeline, term, responsibilities. Like, I could go on. There are so many important things that need to go into that. And you want to make sure that it's designed for what's actually happening in your business. So if you're copying and pasting a template or you're getting it from somewhere, like, actually read it and say, hey, am I doing this in my business? And if it's something legal that you don't understand, get a lawyer to take a look at it for you, get someone to, put their eyes on it. The next I would say is articulate that business structure in a way that is most appropriate for you based on the advice of your lawyer and your accountant. So always when you're thinking about business structure, you want your accountant and your lawyer to be working together because there could be some maneuvers that you have to do from a filing perspective with the CRA to say if you're operating as a sole proprietor and you need to become a corporation or similarly a partnership to a corporation, there might be filing related to, moving your assets from your current business into the incorporated entity that you never would have known about if you said, oh, I'm ready to incorporate. I'm going to do it on the internet right now. And, that the company car and the assets and the inventory that I've had for myself as a sole prop, I'm just going to put those in the company, right? Well, wrong. Like, you can put those in the company, but there are legal and financial steps that need to be taken and articulated for you to do that legally, appropriately, and all the most advantageous way for you. And you wouldn't know about that if you didn't talk to your lawyer and didn't talk to your accountant when the time was, ready to change structures. So, like, you want to make sure that you're setting that up right for you. Another thing that's really essential if you're collecting any type of information. So if you're operating like a weekly newsletter or a monthly newsletter and you're collecting people's information, you need a privacy policy because you have to comply with federal policy laws that say you have to tell people when you're collecting their information, what you're doing with it, how you're treating it, what their rights are related to their information, what the scope of use is. There are so many things that go into a privacy policy that you are legally required to tell the public when you're collecting personal information. Even more so if you are, collecting different types of health information or other personal information. So we really want to make sure that you are in compliance with PIPEDA, the personal, don't ask me what that acronym means right now, but you want to get that because there are fines for non-compliance. I think as far as contracts go, in addition to, those contracts with, like, for your services, whatever those may be, having your contracts, your agreements in place for your team and the people who are, helping you build your business is also super essential, because, you want to make sure, especially if you're working with independent contractors, that you are having everything clearly articulated in that agreement so that there's no confusion with the CRA that they're an employee, especially if they're only earning from you and they don't have multiple sources of revenue, for the services that they're providing. There are a lot of things you want to be careful with when you're engaging an independent contractor, and you want to make sure you have everything clearly documented in writing about that. So, this is about changing your perspective about the law from avoidance to embodiment, because when you avoid, you are, coming from a place of fear. But when you have embodied these legal risk management protections and put them in place, then you have that foundation there manifested in real life to point to support you. Without these physical legal tools in place to mitigate your legal risk, you have nothing physically manifested to do that from a legal standpoint. So you really want to make sure that when you're, like, grinding towards putting your vision together, that there's structure behind it, because otherwise it can become so amorphous. It can become so fluid. And I get it. You didn't start your business to become a lawyer or become a legal expert, but it is incumbent upon you as a business owner to know what you need to know to make the best decisions for your business. Legal is not something that you can, like, offload to someone else to make decisions for you as a small business owner. I want you to feel confident navigating the legal side of your business, these legal risks that you need to manage on a daily basis, because as you scale, your risk scales too. You need to have, the discernment in your terms and conditions to draw lines in the sand to protect yourself, to protect your business. And, some people might say, well, contracts aren't really spiritual, or it's not really like good vibes. That termination policy is a little harsh. Well, I would frankly say the opposite, because all we're doing when we put something in writing is articulating where our alignment is energetically anyway. If you're only in a position to say, this is what I accept, this is what I will take in this circumstance in my business, and that's in writing, that's there, clear as day for everyone who wants to interact with you to see. And it's not unspiritual, it's just clarity. So if you're listening to this and you're realizing, fuck, I've been winging it, I have no idea what Vanessa's talking about here, it's all good. You don't have to panic. I created a free legal guide that you can download on my website. And it breaks down all of this in plain English so you can understand, what the legal risks are, why being proactive is such a huge energetic shift for your business, because it takes you from being, loose and fluid and unprotected and unaware of your responsibilities and all the things out there that you need to do to put in place to protect yourself and protect your business. So I want to say, and just close off today, you are like the steward of your business. You created this beautiful entity and your business, and you deserve to feel safe. You deserve to feel secure legally, structurally, financially, energetically, all of it inside of your business. And that starts with knowing that you've done what you need to do to protect yourself from the things that could go wrong. And you've taken that bold action to do so before it happens. So thank you so much for being here today. Share this episode with someone you think needs to hear it. And I will see you next week for another episode of Sovereign Conversations with me, Vanessa Locicero, your soul attorney. And without further ado, my friends, court is now in recess.
Oh, 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 oh.
That's a wrap for this episode of Sovereign Conversations with the Soul Attorney. If today's conversation sparked something in you, let's keep that momentum going. Head on over to www.thesoulattorney.com to grab free resources, explore my membership community, The Cornerstone, and step even deeper into your power. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, my friends, keep leading, keep trusting, and keep building your empire on your own terms. See you soon.